The most dangerous moment in your life may be the moment when everything starts falling apart. Because what if it's not falling apart? What if something inside you is finally refusing to live the same life? The people leaving, the plans failing, the loneliness. The strange feeling that you don't recognize yourself anymore. You may think these are signs that you've lost your way. But there is a deeper possibility. Asterisk. What if your life has to become unfamiliar before it can become beautiful? Carl Jung believed that the greatest transformation begins when you are forced to confront the parts of yourself you've spent years avoiding. And once you see what is really happening beneath your pain, you may never look at your life the same way again, because the thing you are desperately trying to get back to, asterisk, might be the very thing keeping you from becoming who you're meant to be. The most beautiful chapter of your life may begin at the exact moment you stop recognizing yourself, not because you are losing your mind, because the identity you built to survive is beginning to fall apart. And that can feel terrifying. You may suddenly question the things you once wanted, the people you once needed, the approval you once chased. Even the person you see in the mirror can begin to feel unfamiliar. You still go to work. You still answer messages. You still smile when someone asks if you're okay. But somewhere beneath the surface, something has changed. You can no longer pretend. And this is where the deeper story begins. Carl Jung's philosophy points toward an uncomfortable idea. Becoming psychologically whole requires confronting the parts of yourself you would rather keep hidden, the parts that don't fit the image you show the world. Your insecurity, your envy, your anger, your fear, your need to be chosen, your hunger for recognition. The strange desires you don't want to admit, the wounds you keep calling personality. Most people spend their lives running from these things. They become productive to avoid feeling empty. They become funny to hide insecurity. They become independent because depending on anyone once hurt them. They become perfectionists because failure feels unbearable. They become agreeable because rejection feels like death. And eventually, the mask becomes so convincing that they forget it is a mask. Then something happens. Life interrupts the performance. A relationship ends. A career collapses. A dream doesn't happen. Someone betrays you. You are rejected. You fail at something you thought would prove your worth. And suddenly, the personality you carefully constructed cannot protect you anymore. This is the psychological crisis nobody prepares you for. You discover that what you called me was partly a collection of adaptations, ways of behaving that once protected you, ways of thinking that once helped you survive. But survival and fulfillment are not the same thing. A person can become extremely successful at living a life that doesn't belong to them. And that is one of the quiet tragedies of adulthood. You can achieve the dream and still feel strangely empty because the ego asks, how do I look? The deeper self asks, who am I when nobody is looking? Those are completely different questions. And eventually, life forces you to answer the second one. This is why a period of confusion can sometimes be more meaningful than a period of certainty. Certainty can keep you asleep. Confusion makes you search. You begin noticing patterns. Why do you keep choosing the same kind of relationship? Why do certain people trigger you instantly? Why does criticism hurt you more than it seems to hurt everyone else? Why do you constantly need to prove yourself? Why do you become uncomfortable when someone genuinely loves you? These questions lead somewhere because the people who trigger us often reveal something we have not understood about ourselves. And this is where Jung's idea of projection becomes deeply uncomfortable. Sometimes what we intensely dislike in another person touches something we have refused to acknowledge within ourselves. The arrogant person irritates you. The attention seeker disgusts you. The weak person frustrates you. The selfish person enrages you. But occasionally, beneath that reaction, there is a hidden psychological mirror. Not necessarily because you are exactly like them, but because they have touched something unresolved inside you, something you buried, something you don't want to see. And the unconscious has a strange way of bringing buried things back to the surface. You can ignore a wound. You can distract yourself from it. You can cover it with achievement. But you cannot permanently escape yourself. Eventually, the pattern returns. A different person, a different relationship, a different workplace, the same emotional reaction, the same ending, the same pain, until you finally ask the question that changes everything. What keeps repeating because I haven't understood it yet? That question marks the beginning of a different kind of life. Because now, instead of blaming the world for every pattern, you begin studying yourself. And what you discover there may completely change the meaning of everything you've been going through. Because the darkness you have been trying to escape may not be the enemy. It may be the doorway. And what waits behind that doorway is not the person everyone else wants you to become. It is something much more difficult and much more beautiful. The person you were before you learned to perform for the world. There is a moment in psychological growth when you realize something unsettling. You don't actually know yourself as well as you thought. You know your habits, your preferences, your opinions, your stories. But those things are only the surface. Beneath them exists another world, a world of forgotten emotions, unfinished experiences, unconscious beliefs, and hidden fears. Jung called attention to this deeper psychological territory because he understood something most people avoid. What you refuse to become conscious of can quietly influence the way you live. Consider someone who constantly says, I don't need anyone. It sounds like strength, but perhaps underneath it is a person who once needed someone desperately and learned that needing people was dangerous. So independence became armor. Another person says, I don't care what people think. But they check every reaction, every comment, every expression, every sign of approval. Perhaps they don't lack confidence. Perhaps they are exhausted from needing confidence from everyone else. And then there is the person who always helps everyone. They are generous, reliable, available. Everyone calls them kind. But secretly they feel resentful because nobody seems to care for them the way they care for others. What if their kindness has become a strategy for being needed? That possibility can hurt. Because when an identity is built around being the good one, discovering hidden resentment feels like discovering a stranger inside yourself. This is what confronting the shadow can feel like. The shadow is not simply evil. It contains the parts of yourself you learned were unacceptable, your aggression, your ambition, your sexuality, your selfishness, your vulnerability. your desire for recognition, your ability to say no, sometimes even your strength. You may have been rewarded for being quiet, so you buried your voice. You may have been punished for expressing anger, so you buried your boundaries. You may have been taught that wanting more makes you selfish, so you learn to feel guilty for ambition. The result is fascinating. You don't eliminate those parts, you push them into the unconscious. And then they find other ways to express themselves. The person who never says no suddenly explodes. The person who appears endlessly calm develops silent resentment. The person who claims not to care becomes obsessed with proving themselves. The shadow does not disappear because you refuse to look at it. It becomes more influential. And this is why genuine transformation is not about becoming permanently positive. It is about becoming more conscious. You don't need to destroy your anger. You need to understand what it protects. You don't need to eliminate ambition. You need to discover whether it comes from purpose or insecurity. You don't need to become fearless. You need to understand what your fear is, trying to prevent you from experiencing. That distinction changes everything, because once you understand the hidden motive, you gain choice. Before awareness, the pattern controls you. After awareness, you can decide. And that is the beginning of psychological freedom. But there is another stage. After confronting the shadow, you may discover that the life you were living was built around someone else's definition of success. And this is where individuation begins. Individuation is not becoming more special than everyone else. It is becoming more completely yourself. That sounds simple. It isn't, because becoming yourself often means disappointing people who benefited from the version of you that wasn't authentic. Some people will not understand your boundaries. Some will call your growth selfish. Some will say you've changed. And they're right, you have. But change does not always mean you've become worse. Sometimes it means you've stopped betraying yourself. There is a strange loneliness that can accompany this. You may have fewer conversations, fewer friendships, fewer people who understand you, but the silence feels different. It is no longer empty, it is honest. You begin discovering what you actually believe, what you actually value, what you actually want, not what receives applause, not what makes you look successful, not what keeps everyone comfortable, what is true for you. And then something begins to happen. Your inner world becomes quieter. The need to explain yourself decreases. The need to impress people weakens. You stop chasing every opportunity because you finally understand that not every opportunity belongs to you. You stop forcing relationships because you no longer confuse attachment with love. You stop treating loneliness as proof that something is wrong. And slowly, the person you were pretending to be begins disappearing. What remains is quieter, stronger, less interested in performance, more interested in truth. But there is still one final confrontation, because discovering yourself is only the beginning. You must eventually decide whether you are brave enough to live as that person. And that decision can cost you everything familiar. The final stage of transformation is not discovering who you are. It is refusing to abandon that person again. This is where many people turn back. They become aware. They understand their patterns.